It's the last big final act before the polls of 2019, the last full year budget of the Modi government, and who better than the former finance minister and a man I trust deeply on Indian finance, Indian markets and Indian economy. Former Finance Minister Yashwant Sinha, right here in conversation with us on ET Now on Agenda for the FM. Thank you very, very much, sir, for speaking to us. This is, like I pointed out, going to be the last full year budget of the Modi government. They've presented quite a few before. How different is the context of this budget vis-a-vis the budgets presented before? And I'm talking about the macroeconomic realities, whether it's crude that's going up, whether it is the jobs that haven't been created, whether it is the fact that they are now nearing the end of their term and expectations have now given way to reality check. How different is the context, you believe?
You know, the very fact that it is the last full budget of this government is, makes it very different from the earlier budgets. In the lifespan of 5 years of any government, as is well known, you will spend the first couple of years in taking hard decisions. Then you slow down a bit, and traditionally every government would present a budget which is its last budget, which is populist or, veering towards the popular.
Yes.
They have had a very good run in the last 4 years. This is the first time that the government is under pressure from the rising international crude prices and from some of the problems at home which we have not been able to solve. The last budget is hardly the opportunity where you can take corrective steps either on the agrarian distress front or on the employment front or any other front for that matter. So you will tinker here, tinker there, but I don't think that it's going to be a budget which will set a direction for the future.
So on that note, if I were to ask you, given the realities that you just spoke about, some of the ones that you highlighted, rural stress and crude, which I will take up in greater detail in just a bit from now, what do you expect the broad focus of this budget to then be?
Well, from all the reports which have been appearing in the media, it appears that the government will at least appear to be trying to resolve or address some of these issues. So, for instance, we have been told that there could be perhaps more allocation for agriculture, there could be a price differential scheme, there could be more capital investment in the agricultural sector. Whether it will, these steps will address the agrarian crisis or not is another issue, but the government will certainly try and appear to be addressing these issues.
So what would your prescription for resolving rural stress be?
My prescription for resolving the farmers' distress is very simple. One, we have to increase the capital allocation in the rural sector. We had started the PM Prime Minister's Village Road Scheme, the schemes for storage facilities, the schemes for irrigation. All this will add to the capital investment in agriculture. This is point number one. Point number two is it has to be done in a way which will persuade the state governments
to implement it as well.
To implement it in the manner in which we want them to implement it. That means that the government of India will have to pay 100%. Otherwise, you can't call the shots.
True.
If you ask the states to contribute 40 or 50%, they will do what they want to do. The third and the most important thing is, to my mind, instead of the present crop insurance scheme, we have to move from crop insurance to income insurance. This is an idea that has been talked about in the past, but it has not been implemented. Many years ago, when we were in government, we were discussing this. We have to implement the farmers' income security scheme so that if the farmer loses for whatever reason, the government will compensate through some kind of a mechanism. It could be an insurance scheme, it could be something else. But the farmer's income has to be assured.
So it has to move to income insurance versus crop insurance.
Yes.
Sir, I also want to talk about the big picture. Given the fact that no fresh greenfield projects have taken off, which essentially means that no private sector money is really breaking ground, and public sector is perhaps the only engine of investment right now, what do you believe should be the government's approach to fiscal deficit? Should it be pragmatic and perhaps go ahead and spend more because it has obviously borrowed more? Or should it stick to the path of fiscal prudence that it has laid out?
My take on this is that it has to be consistent. You know, you can't say take credit for fiscal rectitude when it suits you, and at the same time take credit for fiscal relaxation also. You have to have a policy. Now, I am very clear in my mind as his fiscal deficit is concerned. The more important, the real issue there is revenue deficit.
That's right, yes.
Not fiscal deficit so much. I mean, you borrow money and spend it on productive purposes, then ultimately you will be able to service the debt. But if you are spending it on current consumption, then you are leaving a burden for the future generations. So we have to look at the revenue deficit. We eliminate revenue deficit and run a moderate fiscal deficit, I will have no quarrel.
Just a quick question. The N.K. Singh report that was presented, the FRBM Act review that was done, did very specifically say that when structural reforms are rolled out, there could be a relaxation in the fiscal deficit. And I think revenue deficit is a relevant way, but let's just address fiscal deficit by about 0.5 percentage point. Given the fact that we did roll out a GST this financial year, do you believe that gives the government a legitimate excuse to let the fisc expand?
No, I mean the government doesn't really have to, find an excuse. They have to first accept that in extraordinary circumstances, there could be a relaxation, and nobody is going to mind the relaxation, provided it does not add to the revenue deficit. Please remember that when we were faced with the global financial crisis, the then UPA government took liberty with the fisc and added a humongous amount to the revenue deficit. So that was not investment expenditure. I am repeatedly emphasizing before you and your audience that
it has to be revenue deficit that
we eliminate the revenue deficit at the soonest and live with 2%, 3% of fiscal deficit. That doesn't matter.
Fair point.
That will be investment expenditure.
But sir, I do want to also talk to you, while we are discussing the revenue deficit, let's just talk about revenue resources, and those are squeezed. I mean, the collections from GST have been rather tepid. Yes, it has picked up a little in the month of November, but nowhere close to where we can call it a successful implementation, or money has begun to flow in. The central government is committed to compensating the states for the first few years. Where should the budget focus on raising more revenue then? And I'm going to discuss divestment separately in just a bit.
You see, I think on the tax revenue side, there is very, very little scope. Now, non-tax receipts, let's see. I mean, if you take recourse to financial engineering, every finance minister does that. These are signs of bad times. So you ask ONGC to buy HPCL, transfer your borrowing to ONGC.
I was going to ask you that, yes.
Yeah, yes. Or you go for recapitalization of banks and through financial engineering, say it is fiscal deficit neutral. Then why didn't we do it in the first year?
This makes the government appear more desperate than perhaps.
The moment, that's why I'm saying the general rule is when the finance minister takes recourse to financial engineering, then please be warned that we are looking at bad times.
But as a former finance minister and as somebody who largely believes in free markets, and you actually started the whole process, are you going to laud the government for bypassing or overshooting its divestment target, or are you somebody who's not impressed because, ONGC, HPCL has happened, or are you somebody who's okay, it's as long as the job is done, it's fine?
The point is, why? I mean, how do you justify ONGC buying into HPCL? ONGC already had some shares in, I think, IOC,
that's right,
and a couple of other countries. I had tried this, that there should be cross-holding between the
oil majors.
And I was roundly condemned for doing this. Now they sell IOC and buy HPCL. or they sell something else and buy HPC, or they go to the market and borrow, how is it good economics? The government said we'll borrow 50,000 crore, then they said no, we'll borrow 20,000 crore or 30,000 crore because they're asking ONGC to borrow. And
that has shifted to the ONGCs.
Yes, yes. So that's not good economics.
Do you believe the government should set a higher divestment target for next year?
And
will there be appetite?
A genuine see, I'm again on this whole issue of divestment. Let me tell you that in my budgets, I tried to lay down the philosophy very clearly. And what was the philosophy? That here is an asset that the government owns. You want to dispose of the asset to add to your resources. But those resources must be used to create new assets, fresh assets. It cannot be that you sell your family silver and end up being poorer in the long run and by not creating fresh assets. So this money must be used very clearly for creating fresh assets.
This whole PSU bank recap, just taking a leaf away from what you said earlier and what the budget will perhaps also talk about, recap and you know, some of it being front-loaded, SOP for loan disbursement being revised and reviewed. Do you believe this is going to make it easier for credit offtake, credit disbursement, or do you actually believe the process gets even tougher?
No, it has to be, you see, bank recapitalization is just one small part of the whole issue. The second and more important part is reformation. How are you going to reform? I mean, I saw in the media that government is asking the banks to do this, that and the other.
More governance.
These are all administrative steps. That you will be more proactive in examining loan proposals. And
so what sort of reforms would you recommend?
I mean, you look at the government's holding and more independence for the banks as far as their day-to-day functioning is concerned. Government should withdraw. You know, it is the RBI which is regulating credit.
The banks, yes.
And the banks generally, including credit, and RBI will lay down. When it will discuss with government, lay down the social lending norms. But apart from that, the government has no business holding on to 41, 51%, 52%. I am still convinced that government should loosen its grip over the public sector banks, let them come below 51%, retain its rights as I had proposed in my legislation.
That's right, yes, you had, yes.
And make sure that the banks serve the social purpose for which they were nationalized.
Sir, I just want to shift focus to crude, an issue that you referred to in your first answer, and just want to discuss a little more in detail with you. Crude, like you said, has been a big tailwind for this government. Many people believe it's now turning into a headwind. Crude prices have risen from levels of $40 a barrel to levels of 70 that we are seeing right now. How should the government, according to you, tackle crude at this stage? They did not pass on the benefits to the consumer. So I'm presuming in a politically sensitive environment, it will be difficult to pass on the burden. How should they then tackle rising crude oil? You
know, earlier when the crude prices had gone up to $120 a barrel, what was the policy that the government of the day had followed, the UPA government? They had distributed the burden three ways.
That's right.
The government took a part of it, the oil companies took a part of it,
and the
consumer took a part of it. Now, unfortunately, during the better days, we did not share the benefits with the consumer. So therefore, the scope for raising crude oil product prices
will be limited.
Is extremely it's non-existent. And look at the hue and cry which has been created in this country in view of the recent price rise in petroleum products, petrol and diesel and all that. And it has, especially diesel, has a cascading effect on the overall cost of the economy.
That's right.
And we have to be very conscious of this. So I think the government will have to take a view and go back to that formula or devise some new formula, because crude prices have touched $70, gone above $70 a barrel, and the indications are they will continue to rise. And there is no way you can pass on the entire burden to the people. There is only a certain limit up to which the people will tolerate it, and then they will not.
I do want to take a quick moment to talk about the long-term capital gains tax. Now, there's a lot of debate on that, whether it should be imposed or not imposed. The Prime Minister said that the contribution of markets in taxation is very low. What is your own view? Does the long-term capital gains tax is there a case for it, having a long-term capital gains tax on Indian equities?
There should be taxation of the profits. But having said that, I'll say that I abide by the general rule that one should refrain from taxing financial transactions.
Okay.
If you impose a tax on financial transactions, then it drives money into the black economy. And we might have taken some steps, but there is no knowing that black economy will not come back. So, we have to be cautious. Long-term capital gains tax, short-term capital gains tax, the financial transaction tax, etc., there are lots of examples of how it can be played. My own take on this always has been that if there is a profit, then you can lightly tax that profit. How will you do it, through long-term capital gains tax or some other means, is up to the finance minister.
So you don't believe that there is a case to bring long-term capital gains tax on equity at par with debt just yet?
No, I don't think so.
And what's your fear? You believe this is going to drive away the money from Indian markets? Do you believe this could be?
It is, as I said, it's a thin market, it's a very sensitive market, and people are working on very, very small margins.
That's right.
So even a fraction of a percentage of tax will adversely affect it. That's my fear.
Indeed. That settles the debate on LTCG, but let's talk about corporate tax rates. And I think after Mr. Trump has cut corporate tax in America, Indian industry is very hopeful and expecting and rather exuberant that perhaps the finance minister will walk the talk on corporate tax rate cuts in this budget. Do you believe he's morally obliged to, because he has to he's committed to a glide path? He's done that for companies with turnover of less than 50 crore rupees, but what about the rest? What about the rest of the industry? Does the government in this budget have to walk the talk on corporate tax rate?
This is the last chance. There is a last chance to walk the talk. After this, there will be no opportunity for them to implement what they so grandly announced in the earlier budget. So, as people are saying, maybe not 0.5%, but 0.25% reduction could be tried. But he'll have to do his calculations and see how much money he is going to lose and where that money is going to come from, given the fact that tax receipts will not oblige the finance minister in the coming year.
That's right. But will a 0.25 percentage point cut in corporate tax make a difference at all? Or do you believe it's too small an amount to tinker with?
No, it will give an indication that he is prepared to walk the talk. Otherwise, it remains a very empty kind of an announcement.
True. Sir, but while we are talking about corporate taxes, do you also believe, and this was started by you, Mr. Chidambaram also did bring some sort of relief to the salaried middle class, the direct tax slabs, and many people believe the time is perhaps ripe and right to review the tax slab rates. Do you believe, given the macroeconomic realities where indirect taxes are going to be squeezed, is it time to review the direct tax slabs just yet?
You can't review the direct tax slabs by increasing the tax burden on the taxpayer. People will look forward to the review.
Absolutely.
If it brings relief.
Greater exemption.
Raising the exemption limit is one. Or let's say that you say we'll have a 5% slab. When I was chairing the Standing Committee on Finance of Parliament in the last Lok Sabha, I had suggested in our report on the direct taxes code that tax exemption limit should be linked to the rate of inflation, like government DNS allowances, and every year it goes automatically up depending on the rate of inflation. But as far as the tax slabs are concerned, I think they have stood the test of time, and the less we'll tinker with them, the better it is.
I want to ask you a quick question on jobs, because that has been such a huge debate. New reports now pointing out that actually 70 lakh jobs were created based on EPFO data. So A, what is your view based on this new report? And also, how do you expect the budget to aid sectors that are job creators, to aid the sectors that are job guzzlers in the economy? Because jobs, and like you pointed out earlier, in its final year, last full year budget, the government will be expected to talk something on job creation.
You see, job creation is a byproduct of economic growth. And economic growth of a certain type, where manufacturing grows at a very healthy pace, infrastructure schemes take off, then jobs will be created. Jobs will not be created by waving a magic wand.
True.
Now, you have things like the Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, and I would say that the pressure on the budget of the Manrega is an indication of loss of jobs in the industrial sectors, where people have gone back to the villages and are forced to work now as wage laborers in Manrega. So the government will have to, as I said, lay emphasis on infrastructure development. They'll have to lay emphasis on encouraging manufacturing. If these two sectors take off, they're not going to take off in the next 12 months. It takes time. But these are the ways in which jobs can be created. Jobs will not be created by the finance minister mentioning it in the budget speech. And it is a huge issue. You mentioned those 70 lakhs. Any thesis of this kind puts a huge question mark on the way statistics are being, they can't be made to order. It appears as if, we have a job problem, so we'll create jobs through statistics. We have a growth problem, we'll create growth through statistics. And government should be very, very cautious about misusing statistics to prove a point. Otherwise, the credibility of the entire system will be in question.
And you fear this is what has been done here?
I think this is what is happening, that we can't solve a problem, then we'll solve it statistically.
And that never really solves the problem on the ground. A final question to you, sir. While I think the sharpest critics of this government will say that they've resisted populism so far, they haven't gone populist the way perhaps the UPA had in its final years. What would your prescription for Budget 2018 be? How should the finance minister and this government be resisting populism, given that they are going to go into general elections of 2019 and six state assembly elections before that? Do you fear this is going to be laced with populism, and what would your caution?
No, I think first of all, I'll not agree with your contention that the government has not been populist. If you look at so many schemes which the government has introduced over the years, they are nothing but populist schemes. But be that as it may, every government has a right to be populist under whatever garb they put it. This budget, I think the government will do well to refrain from being populist because the resources would not justify it, and the results would not help the government in elections. Populism at the last moment is something which the Indian electorate does not buy. That is what our experience will show.
It has to be populism that finally plays out in the Indian economy and not one that's done in the budget. Thank you very much, sir, for speaking to us. Such a pleasure talking to you.